When a person raises their voice, when they resort to yelling, something profound happens. Instead of amplifying the message, the opposite takes place. The message becomes muted. The human mind is wired in a fascinating way. When we are spoken to calmly, our brains remain receptive, able to process words and reflect on their meaning. But when someone yells, the brain often interprets it as a threat. The body switches to defense mode. The heart rate increases, stress hormones rise. And rather than listening, the person begins to think of how to shield themselves from the attack. So in reality, yelling is not communication, it is noise. Have you noticed that the louder we shout, the less people actually absorb? That's because yelling pushes the listener away instead of drawing them closer. Imagine trying to water a delicate plant with a fire hose. You don't nourish it, you destroy it. In the same way, when we blast our words through anger, the intention is drowned out by the force. The point is lost not because it wasn't important, but because it wasn't delivered in a way that could be received. True communication is not just about what we say, but how it enters the heart and mind of another. If the goal is to be understood, then we must remember that yelling does the exact opposite. It shuts down understanding. A child who is constantly yelled at grows up learning to avoid, not to connect. A spouse who is yelled at becomes defensive, not cooperative. A colleague who is shouted at stops engaging, even if they don't show it outwardly. In every setting, home, work, society, the moment we raise our voice, we lower the chance of being truly heard. And there's something deeper here. Yelling is often a reflection of the one doing it, not the one receiving it. It signals impatience, lack of control, even insecurity. We might tell ourselves that shouting shows authority, but in reality it shows a lack of authority over ourselves. Strength lies not in overpowering someone with volume, but in influencing them with reason and respect. If your words are sound and your intention is pure, you don't need to raise your voice, they will carry weight naturally. Think about history's great teachers and leaders. The ones who left a lasting impact didn't scream at their followers. They spoke with calm conviction, and that calmness itself was powerful. People leaned in because they wanted to hear, not because they were forced to hear. That is the mark of true influence. When we yell, we create distance. When we speak with composure, we build bridges. And isn't that the whole purpose of communication? To bridge the gap between minds, to bring hearts closer, to solve rather than worsen a situation. If yelling tears the fabric of connection, then wisdom must be found in the opposite, in restraint, in measured words, in the strength of gentleness. So the next time you feel the urge to raise your voice, pause and ask, do I want to be heard, or do I just want to release my anger? If the goal is to be heard, then speak in a way that invites listening. If the goal is to heal, then use words that do not wound. Yelling shuts the door of understanding, calm speech opens it. Remember this: when you raise your voice, your words fall. When you lower your voice, your words rise. When we think about yelling, we often look at it as a way of expressing ourselves more forcefully, as though volume adds weight to truth. But the truth does not need to be shouted. What we sometimes forget is that yelling doesn't just echo in the ears of the one who hears it, it sinks into their heart. And once it enters the heart, it leaves a mark. Sometimes that mark is fear, sometimes shame, sometimes resentment. Rarely, if ever, is it love. A human being is not simply a rational machine that processes words. We are emotional beings. Every word we hear carries not just meaning but feeling. When spoken with gentleness, words can encourage, uplift and heal. But when delivered with harshness and raised voices, they can cut deeper than a knife. Have you ever noticed that a single harsh word shouted in anger can replay in someone's mind for days, even years? That is the emotional power of yelling. It lingers long after the moment has passed. And here is something important to consider. Yelling may get compliance, but it rarely gets cooperation. A child who is yelled at may stop what they're doing, not because they understand or agree, but because they fear the consequence of not obeying. A partner may fall silent in the face of a shouting spouse, not out of respect but out of exhaustion. A colleague may nod in submission when a superior raises their voice, but inside they are disengaged. In every one of these cases, the surface may look calm, but underneath, the relationship is quietly eroding. Yelling builds walls instead of bridges. It creates emotional distance, and the more it is repeated, the more the bond of trust is weakened. Imagine pouring drops of acid on a cloth. One drop may not seem like much, but over time it eats away at the fabric until it is fragile and torn. Yelling does the same to human relationships. It corrodes them, often invisibly, until one day they collapse. There is also a psychological paradox here. The more we yell, the less effective it becomes. People grow accustomed to it, desensitized, and eventually they stop reacting altogether. But even if they appear unaffected, don't be deceived. The emotional damage accumulates quietly. Children raised in homes where yelling is constant often carry that emotional burden into adulthood. They may struggle with confidence, feel unworthy of love, or repeat the same cycle of shouting in their own relationships. The echoes of a raised voice can travel across generations. This is why it is so crucial to recognize that yelling is not just about noise in the moment, it is about the emotional imprint it leaves behind. If our aim is to teach, to guide, to correct, then yelling undermines that very purpose. Because the lesson may be forgotten, but the sting of the voice will remain. The one who yelled may not even remember what they said, but the one who received it will never forget how it made them feel. True authority, true influence, lies not in making others fear us, but in making them trust us. And trust is built on respect. When we choose words that protect dignity, when we keep our tone measured, we show that we value the other person not just as a listener but as a human being. That recognition alone has the power to transform relationships. So let us remember, every time we raise our voice in anger, we lower our ability to connect. The emotional impact of yelling is heavy, and it is rarely ever positive. Choose words that heal, not words that wound. Choose tones that invite closeness, not tones that create distance. Because at the end of the day, people may forget what you shouted at them, but they will never forget how your yelling made them feel. Respect is the foundation of every meaningful human relationship. Without it, communication becomes fragile, shallow, and often short-lived. When we raise our voices at people, we strip away their sense of dignity, even if we don't intend to. But when we show respect, even in moments of disagreement, we create the conditions for cooperation, for harmony, and for true connection. Think about it, no one enjoys being disrespected. No one feels motivated when they are belittled or shouted at. We may obey out of fear for a while, but fear does not build loyalty. Fear does not inspire commitment. Respect, on the other hand, draws people closer. It creates an environment where others want to listen, where they want to respond, and where they feel that their worth is recognized. Respect is not a complicated concept, yet it is often neglected in our daily interactions. To respect someone is to acknowledge that their feelings matter, that their perspective holds value, and that they are deserving of patience and understanding. You can be firm without being harsh, clear without being cruel, assertive without raising your voice. True strength lies not in overpowering others, but in uplifting them while holding your ground. When respect is present, people don't just comply, they cooperate. They don't feel forced, they feel valued, and that changes everything. In the workplace, a leader who communicates respectfully inspires loyalty in their team. In the home, a parent who treats a child with dignity raises not just an obedient child, but a confident one. In marriage, mutual respect is what keeps love alive long after the initial spark fades. Respect doesn't weaken authority, it strengthens it. It doesn't diminish discipline, it makes discipline more effective. There's also a deeper truth here. Respect builds trust, and trust is the currency of human relationships. Without trust, no relationship, whether professional or personal, can thrive. And respect is how trust is earned and maintained. When someone knows that you will not humiliate them, that you will not dismiss them, that you will not yell at them when things go wrong, they become open to listening. They feel safe in your presence. And when people feel safe, they become willing to give their best. Philosophically, respect is rooted in recognizing the shared humanity in all of us. Every person you meet has struggles you cannot see, battles they are fighting silently, scars they are carrying from their past. When you choose to speak with kindness instead of harshness, you are acknowledging that invisible reality. You are saying, I see you as a human being, not just as a mistake maker, not just as someone to be corrected, but as a soul worthy of dignity. That recognition itself is powerful. The irony is that when you treat people with respect, even when correcting them, they actually hear you more. They don't just hear your words, they absorb your intention. They sense that you are not trying to break them, but to build them. And because of that, they are far more willing to listen, to adjust, and to cooperate. Respect opens doors that yelling will always keep shut. So the next time you are tempted to raise your voice, ask yourself, will this action bring me closer to the person, or will it push them away?
If the goal is cooperation,
respect is the key. Speak to others as you would want to be spoken to. Treat them with the dignity you yourself crave. Because respect is not weakness, it is the most effective form of strength. Remember this, when you give respect you gain cooperation, and in gaining cooperation, you gain influence that lasts far longer than any raised voice ever could. Conflict is part of life. We disagree, we misunderstand, we see things differently. That is natural, but how we handle conflict determines whether it becomes a stepping stone for growth or a spark that burns everything down. And here is the reality, yelling never resolves conflict, it only inflames it. When voices are raised, tempers rise alongside them. It becomes less about the issue at hand and more about defending pride. The original problem often gets lost as both sides focus on the volume, the tone, the harshness. Instead of moving toward a solution, yelling drives the conversation into a cycle of reaction and counter-reaction. One shouts, the other shouts back. One insults, the other retaliates. Before long, it is no longer a discussion but a battle, and in a battle, the aim is not to understand but to win. But relationships are not supposed to be battlefields. They are supposed to be safe spaces where problems can be solved with mutual understanding. If yelling turns them into arenas of war, then even small disagreements become explosive. And once conflict escalates, it becomes far more difficult to control. Words are spoken that cannot be taken back. Wounds are created that apologies cannot easily heal. The psychology of this is very clear. Yelling triggers what is called the fight or flight response. When someone feels attacked by a raised voice, their brain prepares either to fight back or to shut down and retreat. Neither of these responses produces healthy dialogue. Fighting back escalates the conflict, while shutting down creates silence, resentment, and distance. In both cases, real communication dies. If we want resolution, we must understand that calmness is not weakness, it is strength. Speaking calmly in the face of conflict is not about avoiding the truth or hiding emotions. It is about choosing wisdom over impulse. It is about saying, I value solving this problem more than I value proving my anger. That mindset changes the dynamic completely. Instead of fire meeting fire, calmness becomes the water that cools the flame. There is also a deeper spiritual lesson here. Anger is like a flame within us, and yelling is how that flame escapes. But if fire is not contained, it destroys. In the same way, if anger is not controlled, it harms not only the one it is directed at, but also the one who carries it. The more we yell, the more we feed the flame, until it consumes our peace, our relationships, and our own inner dignity. Think about the moments in your life when conflict was handled with composure. Those moments didn't escalate, they diffused. They created understanding rather than resentment. They strengthened the bond rather than weakening it. That is the power of self-control in conflict. It transforms what could have been destructive into something constructive. We often assume that raising our voice makes our point stronger. But in reality, it makes our point weaker, because the focus shifts from the content of our words to the tone of our anger. The listener no longer processes the logic. They only feel the hostility. And hostility never plants seeds of cooperation. It plants seeds of bitterness. So the next time a disagreement arises, pause before you respond. Remind yourself that yelling is not a solution, it is an accelerant. Ask, am I trying to resolve this conflict, or am I trying to win it? If the goal is resolution, then calmness is the path. Speak firmly but respectfully, directly but gently. You will find that people listen more when they don't feel attacked, and conflicts dissolve more easily when they are not set on fire by raised voices. Remember this, yelling escalates conflict, but calmness disarms it. If you want peace, don't add fuel to the fire, be the one who pours water instead. One of the greatest misconceptions in human interaction is that strength lies in loudness, in aggression, in raising the voice to dominate. But true strength has never been about overpowering others, it has always been about mastering oneself. Self-control, particularly in moments of anger, is one of the clearest signs of real strength. Anyone can yell when provoked, anyone can lash out when frustrated. But it takes a stronger person to remain calm, to hold back, to choose words with wisdom rather than hurl them in fury. Psychologists will tell you that self-control is a higher cognitive function. It requires engaging the part of the brain responsible for reason, for patience, for long-term thinking, instead of succumbing to the immediate impulse of emotion. Philosophers have echoed the same idea for centuries. Mastery of the self is greater than mastery of the world. If you conquer cities but cannot conquer your temper, then you remain enslaved by your own anger. When we practice self-control, we demonstrate discipline, not only to others but also to ourselves. We prove that we are not ruled by our emotions, but that our emotions serve us. And this composure has a profound effect on those around us. Think about it, when someone loses their temper and begins to yell, it usually provokes resistance. But when someone remains calm in the same situation, their words carry more weight. People pay attention because calmness commands respect. We live in a world where shouting is often mistaken for leadership, where aggression is mistaken for confidence. But the reality is that restraint is far more persuasive. A calm, measured voice can silence a room in a way shouting never could. Self-control is quiet power, and it is this quiet power that leaves a lasting impact. There's also a psychological benefit for the one who practices it. When you control your anger, you protect your own peace. Yelling may give a momentary release, but it leaves behind guilt, regret, and often more problems than solutions. By choosing patience, you protect your mental health and your relationships. You leave the encounter with dignity intact, knowing you handled it in a way that built rather than destroyed. Consider how this principle applies in daily life. A parent who yells may force obedience, but a parent who shows self-control teaches their child by example. That child learns that strength is calmness, that respect is reciprocal, and that anger does not have to rule them. A leader who yells may intimidate their team, but a leader who controls their temper earns true loyalty. People follow such leaders not because they fear them, but because they admire them. A spouse who refrains from yelling, even when provoked, communicates love more powerfully than 1,000 affectionate words spoken at other times. In all these cases, self-control becomes the foundation of lasting respect. Philosophically, self-control is also tied to freedom. If your temper controls you, then you are not free. You are at the mercy of every irritation, every frustration, every slight. But when you control your temper, you gain true freedom. You decide how to respond. You decide whether to build peace or ignite conflict. And that choice is the essence of strength. So when the urge to yell rises within you, remember this: it is not a test of the other person, it is a test of you. Will you give in to the impulse, or will you rise above it? Will you allow anger to define your character, or will you let composure define your strength? True strength is not in the shout of the voice, but in the silence of restraint. The strongest person in the room is the one who does not need to yell. If yelling shuts down communication, damages relationships, and escalates conflict, then the natural question is, what should we do instead? It is not enough to say don't yell. We must also learn healthier, wiser alternatives that allow us to express ourselves without causing harm. Because the truth is, life will frustrate us. People will disappoint us. Situations will test us. The challenge is not in avoiding these realities, but in deciding how we respond to them. The first alternative is clarity. Often we raise our voices not because our point is strong, but because we have not expressed it clearly enough. Yelling becomes a substitute for articulation. But when we choose to communicate with precision, choosing the right words, structuring our thoughts, being direct without being disrespectful, we find that others understand us better. Clarity doesn't need volume, it needs sincerity. Another alternative is active listening. Many times, conflict escalates because both sides are speaking, and neither side is listening. Yelling, in fact, is the ultimate form of not listening. But when we pause and make space to hear the other person, we shift the dynamic entirely. Listening itself is an act of respect, and respect invites respect in return. Sometimes the best alternative to yelling is silence, not the silence of withdrawal, but the silence that says, I value what you have to say, so I will hear you out before I respond. A third alternative is empathy. Empathy is the ability to step into the shoes of another, to feel what they are feeling, to see the situation from their perspective. When we do this, our anger softens. Instead of asking why are they wrong, we begin asking why do they see it this way? What might they be going through? Empathy does not mean agreeing with everything. It means humanizing the other person. And once we humanize them, yelling feels unnecessary, even cruel. Repetition is another tool. When someone does not seem to understand us, the temptation is to raise our voice, as though volume will fix the misunderstanding. But volume does not create comprehension. Patience does. If something is important, say it again, but say it calmly. Repeat with gentleness until it is understood. In this way, your persistence demonstrates both seriousness and respect. There is also the power of example. Actions speak louder than words, and much louder than shouts. If you want someone to change, model the behavior you hope to see. A child learns far more from a calm, consistent parent than from one who shouts instructions. A colleague is far more likely to adopt professionalism when they see it embodied rather than demanded.
A spouse responds more deeply to loving actions than to raised voices. Living the example is one of the most profound alternatives to yelling, and perhaps the greatest alternative is choosing restraint itself. Sometimes you don't need to speak at all. Sometimes the best response to provocation is composure, to step back, breathe, and let the moment cool before addressing it. In doing so, you communicate that you are not controlled by the heat of emotion, but by the depth of wisdom. When we put these alternatives into practice, clarity, listening, empathy, repetition, example, restraint, we replace noise with influence, anger with understanding, conflict with cooperation. We learn that communication is not about overpowering, but about connecting, and connection never requires yelling. So let us be people who choose the higher path, not the easy path of shouting, but the harder path of patience. Not the destructive path of anger, but the constructive path of wisdom. Every word we speak is a seed. Yelling plants weeds, gentleness plants gardens. Remember this: a raised voice may silence others for a moment, but a respectful voice echoes in their hearts forever.